live from Nigeria's economic and financial capital, Lagos. This is Business Morning, Monday, July the 16th. I am Boasting Omofaye. We welcome our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. Let's kick off the Business and Markets Week. Countdown now to the MPC Decision Week. That will be Monday and Tuesday next week, 23rd and 24th. That is one key story we're looking at, and that will be very, very interesting. But what's making the headlines as we look at very important meeting next week. The state governments are groaning as the June FAAC meeting, that's the Federal Accounts Allocation Committee, a meeting remained deadlocked for 3 weeks as finance chiefs or finance commissioners of 36 states of the Federation and the FCT refused to accept the NNPC remittances into Federation account. And there is no word yet from the President's office on how to resolve the impasse between the Federal Ministry of Finance, the State Commissioners of Finance, and the NNPC. The Finance Minister, Kemi Adeosun, says the President now has a final say on how to move forward. The meeting has been postponed, it's deadlocked, it's been suspended, it's been rescheduled. Now we have no date in sight as when the June FAAC meeting will be resolved, at least to share what is duly done every month for the month of May. We're now in July. Meantime, the Central Bank of Nigeria says the use of Chinese yuan in Nigeria-China trade transactions will start before the end of this month, and thus kicking off the $2.5 billion bilateral currency swap deal signed between the People's Bank of China and the Central Bank of Nigeria. The regulator here says is tightening rules of the Naira-yuan transactions around what the discount will be to prevent arbitrage by operators in the financial services industry as well as manipulation. And we look up to that taking place. This central bank did a couple of roadshows across the country 2 weeks ago to bring everyone on speed what to expect when this new transaction window with Naira yuan sidestepping the US dollar take off. And right now, the markets and analyst community are on edge as Statistics Office postponed the June CPI, Consumer Price Index, and inflation report release till July the 23rd. The report was due last Friday, but the Statistics Office says that's been pushed forward by a week. That report will be released about 8:15 in the morning on Monday next week. That will be just as the members of the MPC walked into the boardroom of the central bank at the headquarters in Abuja to start their 2 days meeting, and they will have that inflation data on their table and put that as part of the considerations of the MPC July meeting. That will be part of the conversation this morning. Meantime, the latest IMF staff report on Nigeria indicates that inflation will trend higher in the second half of 2018. And back to the Federal Accounts Allocation Committee. That committee of commissioners of finance for state government says they are probing the Federal Inland Revenue Service. The chairman of the forum, Mahmood Yunus, says the committee will probe the revenue agency over underpayment estimated at 90 billion naira for the month of May. The first was the NNPC. Now the committee of FAAC wants to probe the Inland Revenue Service. The NNPC was asked to bring additional 40 billion naira. Now the FAAC committee chairman, who's representing the State Forum, says FIRS also needs to explain 90 billion naira. So this problem looks bigger than we thought. According to the forum chairman, Mahmood Yunus, says we're willing to work with FIRS to increase the generation of all the taxes that can be increased for the benefit of the entire country. But he hinted that the forum is having problems, not just with the NNPC. He said it is not just the NNPC. If the customs are not doing well, we will engage them. And that's a very subtle indication that a few government revenue-generating agencies are having issues with the Federal Accounts Allocation Committee. And that's where the thing stands this morning. Meantime, what's the latest? This just came in. The London Court of International Arbitration has asked Owando's Nigeria's majority shareholder Ocean and Oil Development Partners Nigeria Limited to pay $680 million to Ansbury Investments Incorporated, owned by Italian-Nigerian businessman Gabriele Volpi. London Court also asked Whitmore Asset Management to pay Ansbury Investments total principal sum of $80 million in respect of loan obtained. The court decisions delivered July the 6th says Ocean and Oil is presently indebted to Ansbury in the total principal sum of $600 million, being $130 million in respect of initial loans and another $470 million in respect of subsequent loans. Ocean and Oil owns 59.96% of the Oando Nigeria PLC, which is an energy traded company listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Meantime, the legal officers representing Oando says Mr. Gabriele Volpi of Ansbury Investment Incorporated owes himself $360 million by virtue of his shareholding in the energy trading company, and says Oando owes Ansbury just about $40 million US. That's the story this morning. The figures are all out there, and everyone is still looking at this. How this had to do with investment of Ansbury Investment in Oando Nigeria PLC. So we have a lot to think about and put on the table in the trading week and business week before the MPC July meeting next Monday and Tuesday. Decisions will be on the 24th, and we'll be all over that as always here on the channel. Let's bring in the CEO at Financial Derivatives Company and Channel's economic consultant, Bismarck Rawani, to give us his first word on this very important week where we now tiptoe to the MPC meeting. Mr. Rawani, hope you had a very nice weekend, and perhaps your team got the World Cup, or did you watch the Wimbledon instead?
No, we watched the World Cup and watched both of them, actually. Tennis and football all go together.
Oh, oh great. Was that your team that won yesterday night, France? Was that your favorite team?
I always prefer the underdog. I knew France was going to win, but I wanted Croatia to win, actually.
Well, that's the way to think as an investment analyst. That's very good. Also, we had a few economic issues. Let's get down straight to the business. We have a few economic issues. The IMF staff report on Nigeria is a preliminary findings according to this report, and the views expressed in that statement are those of the IMF staff and do not necessarily represent the views of the IMF executive board. So, but why do we treat this report that says a few things about where the economy goes in the second half of 2018?
Okay, first of all, let's look at the context of the Article 4 review. The Article 4 review is a review by IMF staff and financial leaders in the country. That is the policymakers, the Ministry of Finance, the Central Bank, Office of Statistics, and everybody come together. They review the policy toolkit, and they decide, one, is this toolkit effective, and is it going to be useful in the context of what is happening today for Nigeria? They've reviewed that, and they came up with a few findings. One is that the economy has sufficient buffers in terms of reserves, in terms of higher oil revenue, and in terms of foreign portfolio inflows to support the near term. Two, that the economy is still vulnerable to shocks, and therefore there's a need for a coherent set of policies to ensure that, one, the vulnerabilities to shocks is reduced, and two, growth can be sustained. Three, and more important, is that the tax to GDP ratio is improving, but it's not good enough. And four, the whole question of declining inflation, which is going to inflect and going to be increasing, and the need for a contractionary monetary policy to support the currency. And finally, we want convergent exchange rates so that we have a unified exchange rate rather than having what you call a multiple exchange rate system. Those are the things that have been put there. But procedurally, the IMF staff issued their report. It hasn't gone to the board yet. To go to the board, if the board approves it, then it becomes part of the IMF policy for Nigeria. And it now determines whether you need a structural adjustment program, whether you need a policy support and instrument program, and what you need from the IMF. We are paying members of the IMF, and it is our right and our responsibility to use these resources to actually build our policy framework to improve things as we go along.
How should we move on with this report in terms of coherent set of policies, which the staff says is very urgent for Nigeria to reduce inequalities in the system?
Well, first and foremost, the policy framework we have is good, but the policy rigidities exist. That is, you cannot say that you have a flexible exchange rate at the same time have multiple exchange rate practices. You cannot say you have a flexible exchange rate policy and you have trade restrictions. All of these things have to go together to ensure that you have a policy set, that actually supports your growth strategy. Right now, there are some incoherencies and there are some rigidities that need to be resolved. But having said that, what the IMF is saying that the positives are far in excess of the negatives, but these are just little bottlenecks that you need to take out of the way so that your policies can now begin to be consistent with your economic objectives. I think that is what's important. And to the extent that you have your MPC coming up next week, this is a time to look at it boldly and begin to make decisions. And don't forget, I have always said that any policy decision that you make 8 months to an election can be interpreted to be politically motivated. So central banks have to be very cautious to maintain their autonomy as well as maintain their independence in determining policy rather than staying as part of the political gimmickry.
But again, we have the 2018 budgetary spendings. Do you think this will be some considerations for the MPC next week?
I think that the MPC will have their work cut out for them. One is that you just talked about inflation, but the reality is that MPC will make its decision based on inflation expectations rather than historical inflation. Historical inflation will be a guide. What we see as inflation expectation, that inflation is more likely than not to begin to increase because 1, the planting season has started, 2, the minimum wage is not resolved, 3, the subsidy issue is all over the place. Then 4, and finally, you talked about the FAAC amount and the budget spending. Budget spending has to be congested into an electoral cycle. So you're going to be spending what you were going to spend in 12 months, you're going to spend in 4 months. Most of it will be wasted and part of it will be stolen, part of it will leak. So you're not going to get the impact. So when monies leak, when monies are wasted, when monies are spent frivolously, the impact is always inflationary. This will coincide also with US interest rates increasing and outflow of capital flows. So what do we have? We have $47 billion of reserves. If you discount for $17 billion of FPI and $7 billion of swaps, it still takes us back to about $25 billion or $24 billion as a bottom line. That is comfortable enough for you to actually support the currency. So I wouldn't panic about the vulnerabilities. All we need to do is to ensure that those vulnerabilities are reduced by a coherent set of policies. I agree entirely with what the IMF is saying, and I think we should go in that direction.
Mr. Wani, finally, what's your take on next Tuesday's MPC decisions? Give us one word.
Well, you see, when the World Cup started, I predicted that Brazil will win. So my predictions have become less likely in recent times. So my forecast is that they will do nothing because if they were going to do something, should have done it last time. But again, just as Brazil didn't win, so who knows what's going to happen. So this is another World Cup,
I hope we can sit together next week, Tuesday, Mr. Wani, and have a very good laugh as how this World Cup MPC July goes. Thank you very much. Have a great week ahead, and thanks for raising the curtain on this week's Business Morning editions. Bismarck Wani, CEO at Financial Derivatives Company and Channels Television Economic Counselor. Let's take a break. We'll be right back. You're watching Business Morning.